What's your participants? Well, good afternoon, Albuquerque. Thanks, folks, for joining us for this announcement today. And I know that one of the most important things, of course, at our city and for the community of Central New Mexico is certainly dealing with all the issues with respect to crime and also reform and when it comes to law enforcement. And so today we are announcing 2 new top leadership positions at APD. And this is an exciting day. First off, it's a twofer. We'll explain that a little bit, but we are announcing 2 leaders at the top of APD, and we'll go into those details. But I want to just let everyone know that no matter how folks might feel about the situation of our city or the department and so forth, this is a very exciting occasion for these 2 individuals and their families and for our city. No matter what the context is and no matter what's happening in our city, it is always a very, very big deal when we name a chief of police, and today is no exception. And so let me talk a little bit about the path in terms of how we got here. Firstly, we are going to introduce a new structure that reflects important takeaways that we learned over the last year and through our extensive community input process and even the search itself. Now, throughout the last 6-month search process, we heard and we understand that it takes both an outsider and an insider in terms of striking the right balance for the dual challenges of crime fighting and police reform. And I want to take a moment to just appreciate some of the individuals who helped put this process together. And we're very grateful to Herb Crosby for his work on the search committee and for advising us in so many ways. Also, some folks at the city who played a key role, Alicia Manzano, and our Chief of Staff, Mike Pulley, who did a great job eventually crafting this structure that we're announcing today. I also want to thank the thousands of Braqueños who chimed in and provided their input, be it in the many forums that we had or our survey. And also want to thank the dozens of community groups that participated in this process, and the vetting team and the screening team that ultimately informed and crafted the outcome that we're announcing today. Now, through this process, it has become clear to us that the department would certainly benefit from an outside perspective, especially when it comes to reform. It's also become clear that we don't have the luxury of waiting for someone from the outside to spend a year learning about crime in our very unique city. In fact, we actually could really benefit from someone who knows the ins and outs of APD and also the history and literally every street corner in Albuquerque. So we need a chief who is positioned to fight crime now, and we also need a leader who can drive reform now. So we decided to do both. So we are announcing today that Interim Chief Harold Medina will become our Chief of Police. And congratulations to you, Chief. And you do have to get through council confirmation, so there is a step there for the Chief still, and that should occur on Monday. And I know this is a proud moment for you and all of your family. And if you look at that wall of Chiefs of Police in the Old Town substation, you know, your picture's now going to be up there with folks going back all the way, I think, to 1880 in terms of the rich tradition of our police department, which actually predates the city of Albuquerque in terms of the modern era. And so for us, too, I do want to mention something I didn't even really realize, I think most people haven't realized, but Harold Chief Medina is the first Hispanic chief of police we've had in 20 years. And so we're proud to announce that. Now, we've also created a new innovative position at the top of APD, the Superintendent of Police Reform. And they are also going to serve as the Deputy CAO. That is, of course, Deputy Chief Administrative Officer. And we're going to explain why that's so important in just a moment. And filling that role as our interim superintendent of police reform is going to be Sylvester Stanley. And congratulations, Superintendent Stanley. And he's going to serve in this position on an interim basis as we help build out the position. We do expect that to be probably 6 months to a year. And we'll explain really how important that position is, because his new position, the superintendent role, is going to be directly responsible for key pieces of the reform effort. And he's ultimately in charge of the police academy and all its operations and curriculum under the DOJ requirements. He's also in charge of both internal affairs divisions, including matters of discipline and use of force review. And he has the final say in these matters. And that includes implementing the changes we've discussed previously in regards to our use of force cases and other discipline-related areas, including the backlog that we have as well. So this new position is also going to report directly to our CAO, Sarita Nair. And of course, they're going to work with the chief and with our city attorney, Esteban Aguilar. So both of these leaders are going to focus on their core duties. And they're also going to support each other to get the best results for our community. So I want to share that, I think at the end of the day, it was simply unrealistic and a real disservice to the realities of crime and reform to think that one leader can solve all our challenges. It just simply takes two in this case. And we also want to acknowledge that it's clear there's no silver bullet for a lot of the changes we've got to make that are just going to happen overnight. The reality is we've got to have an innovative model, and that's what we have built here today, that has the potential to break down some of the most persistent roadblocks that have plagued our department for the last decade. So I'm grateful, first and foremost, to all of our police officers who are stretched to the limit during the pandemic and with COVID. They're out there each and every day trying to keep us safe. And so now we have one leader who's going to focus on crime and support reform. We have another leader who's going to focus on reform and support crime. And with that, we believe we're heading in the right direction, and now it's time to accelerate our progress. So to touch on some of these details, the woman in charge of our city, Sarita Nair. Sarita?
Thank you, Mayor Keller, and congratulations, Superintendent Stanley and Chief Medina. A lot of other cities have been trying out different types of models to focus on these dual challenges that the mayor talked about. For example, in Dallas, they created an integrated public safety solutions officer. Seattle created an executive director of the Community Police Commission, also with some oversight over internal affairs, and a street czar. Atlanta has a justice reform policy advisor, and New Orleans has a director for the Office of Police Secondary Employment. So a lot of other cities are trying to navigate these two worlds of reform and fighting crime. We also looked at previous iterations that we've had right here in Albuquerque, including the former position of Deputy CAO and Chief of Public Safety, and we decided that this was really the right fit for right now in our city. Chief Medina will be able to be laser focused on fighting drivers of crime, and that includes all of the operations to arrest the drivers of crime in our city, working with the district attorney to keep them behind bars, investing in long overdue gunshot technology, and staffing our specialty units like homicide and crimes against children. Meanwhile, the superintendent position is based in part on the previous Chief of Public Safety role, but it's updated for current times. Sylvester Stanley will deliver candid assessments of the police department's reform initiatives. He will oversee the academy, including cadet training, continuing education, and the tools to foster culture change. And he will also ensure that compliance with the CASA related to training and is all being handled appropriately, and he'll oversee all internal affairs matters. With a top-level position overseeing each of these priorities, we're really looking forward to the next chapter. And both the Chief of Police and the Interim Superintendent of Police Reform are appointed by the mayor and will report directly to me. Mayors are, of course, ultimately responsible for selecting appointed positions, but our administration chose to create a community input process for the police chief search. As you know, and as the mayor mentioned, we began in October, and we spent the following 3 months gathering input from the community. The search process was guided by Mr. Crosby, a local consultant and the owner of Avtech. We conducted 40 community input sessions and received nearly 2,300 responses to the survey online. And a lot of times, as the mayor alluded to, those we would read one response that said we must have an outsider, and the very next response would say we must have an insider. And so we knew we had to balance the two of these, and that's really what we're trying to do today. So the next step, the appointment of Chief Medina will go to the City Council for confirmation. Superintendent Stanley will serve on an interim basis in his position, and the administration will be introducing him to City Council during the presentation at the upcoming meeting, and then he will help build the position before an eventual national search for a permanent appointment, who will be subject to City Council confirmation. And with that, I will turn it over to Chief Medina.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, CAO, and congratulations, Sylvester. I love this community, and I'm fortunate to have raised my family in a city where so many people are willing to pitch in and to help make a difference in our community. Now I'm humbled by Mayor Keller, who's giving me the opportunity to be the Chief of Police and to provide leadership for a new generation. I think it's important that we lead by example. We talk a lot about culture change, but we have to show that the culture change is real, and it has to start at the top with the Chief of Police. I want to empower our officers and supervisors to do their job with integrity, but the entire department has to be accountable, and we have to be transparent about that accountability, and the community needs to know that we're serious about it. That's how we'll eventually achieve ultimate reform for the police department and meet the requirements of the settlement agreement. We need buy-in from the rank and file, and we are committed to doing the hard work to get there. At the same time, it's important that we meet our goal of hiring 100 new officers. I strongly believe that we can reform and fight crime at the same time. It's important that we can have that balance of being good crime fighters with one hand, and with the other hand ensuring that it's done in a constitutional manner. I'm a street cop at core. I spent the vast majority of my career patrolling the streets of Albuquerque, and particularly the streets of Southwest Albuquerque. Fighting crime is my top priority. I took the experience that I learned in running field services. As interim chief, my first directive was every meeting should revolve around crime fighting. Otherwise, there shouldn't be a meeting. We meet every morning to talk about shootings and homicides that occurred in the past 24 hours. That's in order because the history of this department has been that there's silos and there's lack of communication at times between all the different parts of the police department. I have to work together, and every question needs to be revolved around how we can continue to reduce crime. We came up with some great initiatives like Metro 15, our gun violence reduction unit, the violence interruption program. We recruited hundreds of new officers, tripled the size of our homicide unit, and we now doing weekly anti-crime operations. Just a few weeks ago, we achieved our 1,000th arrest during those anti-crime operations. We need to create the culture that the Albuquerque Police Department not only polices constitutionally, but that we're proactive and we're out there to ensure the community is safe and getting individuals the resources they need, whether it's incarcerating an individual or it's getting them into the diversion programs that are needed for them to overcome the underlying issues. But it's all for nothing if we don't continually assess on how we could become better. We need to always assess and see how we need to make modifications into what we're doing so that for once we're in front of the problem instead of behind the problem. It's going to be imperative that we create these systems to self-assess and self-improvement the whole time, whether it's for the compliance side or for the crime side time. I created Duke City Stats, and it's been a work in progress, but it's helping our commanders identify what are the biggest concerns in their community and quickly identify those trends before they become huge problems that are plaguing an area command or a community that is within that area command. And the most important component of our crime fighting efforts is the officers in the streets. Just like when I patrolled neighborhoods in Southwest Albuquerque, today's officers want to be valued. They want the opportunity to do their jobs and contribute to the safety of the communities that they call home. I thrive on being out in the community, creating relationships and building trust. I look forward to working with all those partners as we redouble down on our efforts to make Albuquerque safe and healthy. History of community policing in the Southwest for me was a story of developing relationships and working with the community, whether it be our late City Councilor Ken Sanchez, neighborhood presidents such as Louis Tafoya, or current people such as Jeanette Baca or Councilor Pena in the Southwest. Those relationships were relationships that were built years ago. They're built upon trust, understanding, transparency, and strong communication. And that is the same bond that we must create with all neighborhoods in all parts of the city, with all of our commanders and all our officers throughout the city of Albuquerque. As Chief of Police for the Pueblo of Laguna, I learned so much about culture. I learned so much about community policing and the role that police play and how you could change the way a police department is viewed by a community. As interim chief, I quickly created the ambassador program to ensure that every community member's voice is heard, with a special focus on those communities that don't always feel their voice was heard by the Albuquerque Police Department. One of the early outreaches that I made was to a young man named Tayberry, who was an organizer of several protests last year. We've developed a relationship in working and understanding, and just a couple weeks ago, we had our first successful town hall with members of the black community to discuss police-law enforcement relationships. We're going to continue on this trend and develop relationships through the ambassador program with as many different groups in the community that sometimes feel their voice isn't always heard. As I said before, the people in this community need to pitch in and help. And they're part of all the success. The more they're willing to work with the Albuquerque Police Department, the more they're willing to listen to us and us listen to them and find solutions to the problems that we have as a community, the stronger and more healthier community we're going to be. But at the same time, we need to re-image law enforcement. We need to ensure that our department is viewed upon as being out and listening and working with the community and being respectful of people's rights and ensuring that everything we do is constitutionally based. This is the type of leadership that I'd like to bring to the Albuquerque Police Department and continue the trend of us developing those strong relationships with the community and building that trust. This is especially special for me for a variety of reasons. I talk a lot about creating a healthy community. And in creating that healthy community, I think it's about creating opportunities for everybody within our community, no matter their background. I'm a first-generation college graduate. After I graduated from the University of New Mexico, my younger sister graduated a short time later from the University of New Mexico. Both my daughters have graduated from the University of New Mexico, and my youngest has just been accepted into law school. I think it's important that we continue this trend of the next generation being better than those. As I walk the halls of the Albuquerque Police Department and the Chief's office and I look over, it's not only about the barriers I helped my family overcome, but how am I going to take down the barriers for the next person to become the Chief of Police for the Albuquerque Police Department. And I want every officer to know, regardless of their background, their upbringing, that you can become a leader in this department through hard work and ensuring that you do the right thing and that you provide a service to the community in a way that is going to be in line with our core values of trust, transparency, and ensuring that everything we do is for the community and that we're here to make the community safe. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chief. And now we'll bring up our new Superintendent of Police Reform. He's a 4-time former chief in New Mexico, and so we're grateful to have him as part of the leadership team, Sylvester Stanley.
It's an honor to continue my service to the community by taking on this new innovative role. Bringing real reform and cultural change is a mighty task. It's no secret that the department has been struggling to prevent and correct mistakes through training and to hold people accountable for misconduct when that training doesn't work. But we are not going to give up on the vision that we all share, to make it possible for people from all walks of life to feel safe in our city. But we are not going to give up on that vision. It's important that we do that. This role will be a pivotal, but not only for working with the DOJ but for making sure that the reform efforts will last even after the monitor is gone. In this executive level position, I will oversee academy operations, DOJ requirements relating to training, and internal affairs matters, including discipline, and report directly to the CAO. From the outside looking in at the Albuquerque Police Department, I, like many other New Mexicans, have watched for years and felt that traditional department management models just might not be able to get the job done during these tough times. By creating this role, the mayor and his team, I believe, are demonstrating both courage and confidence by putting the department in a place where it needs to be. This institutional change gives us a path forward to move the needle on both reform and crime fighting. I have served as the chief of police 4 times, and I am one of the only 3 African Americans who have made it to that rank in New Mexico. I look forward to making history with our community again as we build this significant role.
Thanks so much, Superintendent. Well, thank you so much for those remarks. And let me just say that, we know that it's obviously we've had a tough year in terms of crisis for everyone in our community. We also know in many ways this year is about turning the page. It's about building for recovery and getting us in not just the right direction, but moving forward in our year of recovery. And these 2 leaders are going to help us do exactly that. Now, I also want to mention that, it's time for us as a community to really get behind these 2 individuals. No matter how you might feel about various controversial issues, be it around reform or crime, these are 2 folks who we have charged with, in many ways, keeping us safe. And that means keeping all of us safe. And for us, we got to give them a chance. We got to get behind them, and we got to see what they can do for a year or so and let them do what they believe they can do, and I believe they can do, to both bring about reform and reduce crime. So with that, we're very excited to support each of you in your role, and certainly that's my job as mayor. Now, with that, I think we're going to take some questions from folks, of course, and so like usual, I'll kind of hand them to the respective person, and we'll take your questions.
All right, let's start with Matt Grubbs. Go ahead, Matt.
Hi, Matt. Hi, Mayor. Thanks and congratulations, gentlemen. One sort of nuts and bolts question. Who is going to have the final say on officer discipline? And then to each of the appointees, what do you feel is the significance of having 2 men of color in these positions? Thanks.
Appreciate that question. And one, we can give you a clear answer. The answer is Superintendent Stanley has the final say on discipline. This is something that is very substantial and different, obviously, than we've done in the past. And to your second point, it's something that actually, even with Chief Medina, we just kind of checked on this morning. So these individuals were chosen based on their qualifications, but it certainly is an extra reflection of who we are as a community, that our community safety efforts are being led by 2 folks of color. And I think that's something we're very proud of.
All right.
Do you want to ask on that?
Go ahead.
Yeah, we can just check. Matt, did you want sound from them on that question?
It would be great if someone has something to offer. I'm happy to hear.
Yeah, sure. So this is what happens with Zoom, right? So Sylvester and Harold, if you just want to reflect on either of those, we'll start with Sylvester. You're just closer.
Well, Matt, as indicated, one of the duties and responsibilities the superintendent will have is all the discipline and their action that will be taking place in regards to investigations from internal affairs or within the department. So that's going to be a new effort. It's new for the department. It's new for us, but it's the way that I think we're going to do real well. And the mayor has laid this out, he and his staff, and this is the direction we're marching.
Matt, that's a great question. And for me, it's the needed help that sometimes you need 2 people to be able to get a job done. And I think the first thing you have to be willing to overcome is ego and understand that you don't have to be in control of everything. I know the limited time and I know the hours that it takes to get our city safe. And now I can focus on exactly what is at the core of my heart of policing, and that's being a crime fighter, going out and ensuring that we make the community as safe as possible. And having Sylvester help us with some of these topics and work the discipline is only going to give us more time to focus on the crime fighting efforts. And I look at it as a positive, and him having the final say in discipline, I think is a great thing. The second question about having two people of color, I think it's important that the community is reflected in the police department. And when I looked up at that wall as I spoke earlier, I think it was about 13 or 14 years in the 132-year history of the Albuquerque Police Department where you actually had a person of color that's in charge of this police department. And maybe it's that difference that has led to some of the conflict or some of the lack of understanding within the community. And I think this is where we can truly start making a difference and ensure that we work together as a community to take down every barrier. So maybe this time it's a person of color, and maybe next time it's somebody of a different gender. Thank you.
Thanks so
All right,
much.
Megan Abundance, go ahead.
Thank you. This question is for Chief Medina. The homicide rate is on record-setting pace in 2021. We've seen the additions that you have created to the homicide unit, but we're still playing catch-up. You have been the leader for the department for months now, and we'd like to know, what will you be doing as chief that wasn't being done before? I mean, is there a greater sense of urgency to get things done now? How do you plan on being more proactive?
Chief, come on up.
You know, Megan, and unfortunately, there's a lot of factors that are related to our crime problem that we have in the city of Albuquerque. And we've talked about this, and I've been very vocal about the fact that this is a community problem, and we need to continue to work with the community, develop those relationships to ensure that we're developing a strong public safety concept within the city of Albuquerque, and that takes our partners at the state level, the federal level, and the county level to work with us to develop these processes that are going to make the city safe in the long run. But it's also about creating a healthy community and creating opportunity for our youth and working with our youth. And those are truly the long-term solutions. In the short term, we will continue to be proactive, quickly move resources where we need to. We've identified that social media in particular is driving some of our crime rates. We will continue to work and give resources where they're needed. We have a large academy class starting in March. We'll be devoting more resources to that. And there's always been a sense of urgency for us to bring safety to the people of Albuquerque. We will continue working hard as we add additional resources. We will devote those resources to what we think the biggest problem is at the time, while at the same time working with these partnerships with the community to create long-term sustainable goals of reducing crime.
Thank you.
One second, I know Megan has one follow-up.
Thank you. I appreciate your answer. We would like to know, I mean, you talked about those programs today with Metro 15, the VIP. What do you say to people in our community who hear those programs and think maybe it's just another plan, and it doesn't seem to be working because violent crime is going up? I think, what do you need in order to make these plans work?
Okay.
You know, Megan, I think we also have to remember that we're in the midst of a pandemic, and there's a lot of that. We're not the only city going through this nationwide. Last week I saw a stat that the city of Oakland is a city that has a VIP program, and it was very successful in cutting their homicide rate in half over the previous past years. And right now they're looking at a 400% increase in homicides in 2021. Everybody's seeing this effect of COVID and how it's affecting the rest of the nation. And Albuquerque is falling in line with a lot of what's going on around the country. What we can do is continue to ensure that we're focusing resources where they are, and recognize that the men and women of the Albuquerque Police Department, both sworn and civilian, are putting as much effort, working in long hours, and doing everything they can to ensure that the community is safe. And in respect for those officers in our department, we will continue to support them and make sure that they have all the resources necessary to continue to work hard and make the community safe. And I think that when the pandemic is over, obviously we're hoping that this changes, but it is having a big impact on the community. And we'll continue to make the adjustments necessary when we see a crime trend. We'll continue to be as proactive as possible. We'll continue to work with our partnerships with the DA's office or with other law enforcement agencies to ensure that we're as proactive as possible. But the solutions aren't something that the Albuquerque Police Department alone is going to be able to do to make crime go down and to stay down. There are a lot of factors within our community, whether it be the courts, the DA's office, the limitations of a lot of the systems. And I've talked about this. How do we make sure that all parts of the system have all the resources necessary for those long-term solutions? And right now, we don't. We know that. And we'll continue to work hard to ensure that we develop systems within the city that help us reduce those crime rates.
All right,
Thanks,
let's
Chief.
go next to Elise with the APD General.
Hi, yes, thank you for taking my question. With respect to the superintendent position, this is a question for the mayor or maybe Sarita. When did you decide to create this position like this, and who else was considered? How was Mr. Stanley chosen for this role?
Sure. Well, I'll touch on this briefly, and then our CAO can add in. We've actually been working on this since we thought about the Chief of Public Safety position, right, which is one that was sort of a throwback. So this is really about modernizing and focusing that role in a different way. But that's when the conversation began, and of course we had that position posted and vacant as well, and looked through all of those resumes and talked to folks about that. And we actually used the chief search process itself with Herb to talk to some candidates about the idea. And it was actually refined and sort of honed down by folks who were even applying for both jobs. So in many ways, we actually learned nationally about how to create this role. And so we do appreciate the input that all those candidates gave us.
And so, we did talk to a variety of folks about this superintendent position, including some of the people who had applied in the chief process. But what it really came down to was just the unique skill set that Sylvester Stanley has to offer and will bring to this job. He has a long history of working with the federal government, for example, well known to DOJ people because of his roles in Indian country. He has a good track record of holding officers accountable, but also of understanding their needs when it comes to training and that lifelong journey of becoming an outstanding police officer. And so he was a natural fit and the top candidate for this position.
Okay.
Just got one more from Elise, Kaplan from the Journal, so let's go to her and we'll wrap things up.
Yeah, thank you. Just kind of nuts and bolts question about like the force review board and the external force investigation team. Will both Chief Medina and Mr. Stanley be sitting on the force review board, or how does that work, and how will those responsibilities be divided? Who's going to oversee the external force team?
Sure. Sarita and I are actually our CEO can take that one.
Thanks, Elise. It's always good when someone's really drilled in on all the details of this stuff. Great question. So the Force Review Board composition is actually set out in the CASA and the court-approved special settlement agreement. And so those roles will not change. And just for folks who are listening who aren't familiar with the terminology, the Force Review Board looks at cases that have already gone through the disciplinary process, and it looks at cases that have already, had their force review process, and it sort of deconstructs them. It's sort of a postmortem to say, okay, did we do everything right? And most importantly, are there lessons that we need to take into the policy world from what happened in this particular case? So the composition of the FRB will remain the same, and I don't believe the chief sits on it now. The chief of police position does not sit on that, but some of the deputy chiefs do, and as well as some commander level positions. Now, the EFIT team that you referred to is the external force investigation team that was just agreed upon with the DOJ in the stipulated agreement, and that is to really bring in some outside expertise to internal affairs, and so that will be squarely under Superintendent Stanley. And the real goal of that is to get some outside eyes on our process and also just on the brass tacks of how people are implementing that process. They'll be side by side with our force investigators to say, okay, here's where this investigation is going great, or here's where this investigation maybe fell a little short, and here's how we can make, most importantly, the whole thing go faster and more efficiently without sacrificing quality so that we can get ahead of our force review pipeline. And so that will be squarely under Superintendent Stanley.
Okay, and I would just also remind, this is a great point, Elise, but that you might notice that the deputy CAO role, right, is part of that designation, which gives Superintendent Stanley that kind of oversight and final say over discipline. So that's a key piece to making this job work. Any other questions?
We've got one more from Madonna.
Thank you. I have a question for Chief Medina. So APD has been criticized for not effectively addressing the DOJ reform. We're now over 6 years in the reform process. How do you respond to this?
Sure. So, Chief, you can field that, and the biggest response is also the new position. So if Stanley wants to chime in too.
You know, and that's one of the difficult portions in dealing with this question is DOJ has been here 6 years, but this administration has only been in charge of the police department for 3. And when we inherited the DOJ problem, there was a lot of conflict between the previous administration and DOJ, and we've taken a lot of positive steps forward. A compliance bureau was created in 2018 to oversee that portion of, to oversee the settlement agreement. And from that, we know that we've been able to attain 100% compliance in our primary compliance levels, and that's basically the development of policies. When we look at the next level, the training that's associated with those policies, I believe we're somewhere in the 90s. We'll have to verify that because I don't have those exact numbers at the top of my head right now. And the third and final level is in the 60%. And I think when you recognize that this is a process that is very complex and has a lot of moving parts to it, the city has taken a lot of great steps in going into compliance, but there are some key areas, and those key areas are where we're at right now, and they're the most difficult areas. It's the changing of culture within the Albuquerque Police Department. And in order for us to affect that culture change, that's why Mr. Stanley is here, to assist us in ensuring that all the time necessary is devoted to discipline, internal affairs cases, force review board cases, to ensure that there's a good thorough review and individuals are held accountable, and to make sure that action is corrected. The academy is also part of that. Bringing in an outsider is going to help us where the key to our officers and their future is the most important, is how we train and develop the next generation of Albuquerque police officers, and getting an outside eye into that. So I do recognize that we are 6 years into it, and we're reminded of that frequently from a lot of different parts of the community. And we have to respect that, and that's why I think that making these changes now and bringing in Sylvester to have those outside view in those key areas is going to help us get to the next step. Creating the Compliance Bureau helped us get to those numbers I stated earlier, and we're hoping that this next step will help us get even further into compliance and getting the culture change that's necessary for the police department to get out of the settlement agreement and meet the needs of the community. Thank you.
Anything? You good? Up to you. Sure. Okay. Also, I think now that it's part of his divisions, our superintendent wants to chime in as well.
Well, good afternoon. As you know, we're just kicking this new program off. We're getting started here. So obviously there's a lot of meetings and stuff that has to be done and set the groundwork and review a lot of past policies and future policies. But the most important thing I think I can say at this point is the fact that we'll be fair with everyone who's involved when it comes to that discipline. You have to be fair. We have to have integrity. The men and women who are doing those investigations have to have the integrity and be professional how we conduct that. Now, I know from where you're sitting, you says, well, that's some of the same stuff, but that's how we get to where we need to be so we can end this DOJ review down the road here. But we have to start here. The mayor and his team has done a good job of thinking outside of the box. We've created this new position and this new direction, and I think the next time we probably have a conversation, we'll have a lot more positive information for you.
Okay, any others? All right, there's no others in the queue, so with that, we'll wrap it up, and congratulations to both our Superintendent of Police Reform and our Chief of Police. And Herb, once again, thank you for the answering the call of duty for recruiting once again. And we look forward to all you'll be able to do for our city. Thanks so much.